Now, what I'm going to do is problematize things again for you. As you know, I believe that art conveys a profound truth about truth, and that is that truth is not either or, it's both and. And so I know what I told you last week with Hilma of Klint about what happens when we hesitate to express our gifts to the world. Well, now I'm going to, apparently, and it might appear this way, argue the opposite with our artist du jour today. If it seems like I'm contradicting myself, we'll just hang on and see what you think by the end. So last presentation, we were introduced to a woman artist, Hilma of Klint, who may have rewritten art history as the first abstract artist. Well, today, I'm going to offer a new assessment by introducing another artist who beat of Klint by 45 years. To approach the spiritual in art, one will use as little of reality as possible. So said Piet Mondrian, one of the fathers of abstract art. Here's one of those art pieces that we're going to be talking about today. Art critic and television documentary producer Waldemar Janaszek, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, probably not, after looking at the works of our artist du jour, stated, quote, "Only rarely in my time as an art reviewer have I felt as flabbergasted as I was by the watercolors of Georgiana Houghton. Her dates had me rubbing my eyes in disbelief. She did this when? Out of nowhere, like an unforeseen comet, a career has appeared in art that rewrites the whole story." Georgiana Houghton was born in the Canary Islands of Spain on April 20th, 1814, to English parents. Her father was a foreign merchant, and though their primary residence was in North London, the family traveled frequently to the Canary Islands and Madeira, so she had a nice, broad experiential background. Houghton, as well as her younger sister Zilla, received artistic training. And like the artist Hilma of Klint, Houghton actively participated in seances and spiritualism. Houghton got involved in seances primarily to visit her deceased and beloved younger sister Zilla, who died after giving birth to her fourth child. Because her deceased sister had been an artist, Georgiana believed that some of her early spirit drawings were essentially created by her deceased sister. Here is how Houghton's first experience of seances is described on a website devoted exclusively to her life and work. They visited Mrs. Mary Marshall. She was a medium, a popular medium in London at the time, a widow who lived with her son Emmanuel and his wife and cousin Mary Brodie. They sat at a round table. Raps were heard, and Georgiana was astonished at the ability to communicate with her youngest sister Zilla, whose death in 1851 had left her devastated. Georgiana asked her many questions about her happiness and whether she had any concerns. The name Helen was given, which for Georgiana proved to her beyond doubt that spiritualism was real. Later, a planchet, that device is something I'll discuss next. Later, a planchet was used, and she asked how long it had been since the first brother she had lost had passed to spirit life. The answer was 33, also correct, as her beloved Cecil Angelo had died in 1826. From that moment, Georgiana's belief in spiritualism did not waver, firmly believing it was a blessing from God. Well, as I mentioned during the last presentation on Hilma of Klint, seances were popular during Victorian times. Queen Victoria herself allegedly participated in them. Now, this is a planchet used during these seances, which is the precursor of the Ouija board. Participants lightly placed their hands on top of the planchet, which was placed over a sheet of paper. A stylus was attached underneath, and believing the planchet moved around through the guidance of spirits, writing or shapes would appear on the paper. Spiritualism, as it was called then, attracted atheists as well. It seems people from every class and belief were drawn to the fascinating and mysterious experience of seances and channeling. Houghton herself was firmly Christian and saw no conflict whatsoever. She said, quote, "What I have striven to prove is that spiritualism does not come in place of Christianity, for where would have been the gain in casting off that great joy and happiness, only to receive something else in exchange? What I maintain is that it is bestowed as the crown to all previous knowledge." Now, here we go with some of her earliest art. For her earliest works, Houghton actually used the planchet to create the curves and swirls. The spirits, such as this one named Henry Lenny, that's who he presented himself as, Henry Lenny, were guiding the planchet. But soon Lenny told Houghton to put away the planchet and that he, along with other spirits, would guide her arm and hand as she held a pencil and paintbrush. This work on the left may be her first attempt free of the planchet. And on the right, take a close look. This is the Holy Trinity, which many critics consider the first purely abstract of Houghton's works. And mind you, look at the dates and recall that Hilma af Klint's first abstract work was 1906. Several of these initial efforts looked like floral studies, but Houghton insisted the forms represented floral life from the spirit world and represented the character and values of the deceased person who inspired them, or should I say, guided their expression through the arm and hand of Houghton. Give you a second to take them in. What might be most interesting about Houghton's work is that on the reverse of most of her paintings, she described the meaning and inspiration for the works. For this one, she wrote, "I must now describe Zilla's flower that you see here. It is blue because she was true and steadfast in all her dealings, never being induced to swear a hair's breadth from what she knew to be right. The blue leaf at the back represents what she was, that she was a daughter, a wife, and a mother. And the center leaf is much the largest because the duties of a mother are of the highest importance." Here's another early work. Now, I'm not sure why she included an actual objective image of a very English-looking Jesus, Shakespearean curls and all. It might have been experimental, adding an image the artist consciously created to an otherwise spirit-guided, non-objective work. After all, look at the background. At least that's how it appears to me. During her one major exhibit, which I will mention in a little bit, she did not include this work, perhaps because it contained an unchanneled image of the Savior. By 1864, the floral forms seem to have vanished from her works, even if their titles, like the one on the left, still contain references to flora. As you can see, they are quite stunning. The term abstract art did not exist during Victorian times, so she referred to her art as spirit drawings or spirit paintings, art literally channeled into existence by heavenly spirits. Now, if this sounds out of the ordinary for artists, consider that at this time, other creative types with stellar reputations as artists were experimenting with spirit guides as well. Writer Victor Hugo and his son, as well as the famous French playwright Victorien Sardou, all tried their hand at spiritual painting. Most of the titles to her art have direct religious references, even if guided by a once living artist. The reverse side of this work states the painting was guided by Italian Renaissance artist Correggio, not to be confused with Caravaggio. Correggio. The white gouache was described on the back as, quote, "pearls of divine love." In order to truly appreciate these works, Houghton recognized viewers needed to get up close to see the detail. So she handed out magnifying glasses to viewers so they could notice all of the various layers of swirls and filigreed forms. Let me go back here. She said, "No one could figure to themselves my delight when I beheld the lovely array of the whole of these works that had grown under my own hand with daily new revelations of unknown beauties and unsuspected truths." I'll give you a moment to look at these works because they're so intricate, they're so detailed, these are multi-layered. And when I was doing my research, all of the art critics said you really have to be in front of them. They're mesmerizing because of the various layers, the intricacy of the details. And that is also why she handed out magnifying glasses. Now, this work that you're looking at now was also credited to Correggio. I have to ask, if Houghton truly believed she was merely a medium for a long-deceased artist, who then should get the credit for the first two abstraction? Correggio or Houghton? It's just a question. All artists who had seen my drawings had said I ought to exhibit, but I had always a feeling that they could not be understood. She went on to say, "I know how great is the power emanating from these drawings, for they are filled with spirit from the guiding influences. Yet people are too completely material to be aware of it." Now, I realized in our last presentation about Hilma af Klint that I encouraged us to not hesitate to put our gifts out into the world. Hilma missed her place in art history by doubting her work and the public who might have seen it. So now, as is my custom, I will seem to contradict that bit of advice. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. These words spoken by the teacher from Galilee are a warning. The eyes and ears of many are not ready to receive certain spiritual wisdom, for it will be misunderstood. People will be confused and criticize the giver. True, turn on the artist. Perhaps even demonize the artist, or figuratively crucify the artist. Georgiana Houghton wondered if her audience was ready to receive the artistic expressions from the spiritual plane. But she did eventually heed the advice of the other artists to show her art. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide if she made the right choice. Take a moment to inspect this work before I move on. In 1871, she organized and subsidized from her own funds an exhibit of her works at the New British Gallery in Old Bond Street, London. She displayed nearly all of what she had painted over the previous 10 years, and that would be 155 works in total. Keep that number in mind. 155 works on display. There were some reviews expressing fascination with her spirit drawings, the most favorable coming from other artists and the clergy, but some from news reporters. One writer for the News of the World wrote, "The lady and her drawings constitute a little poem, fanciful and beautiful, its aims and ends being to establish the holiness and beauty of pure religious principle and the happiness which it creates in this life, leading to the greater happiness hereafter." And this positive review appeared in a society periodical. "The watercolor drawings are so extraordinary in character and are so entirely opposed to one's ideas of art, ancient or modern, that criticism in the ordinary manner becomes difficult, not to say impossible. And then added later, many of the drawings may look like singular and confused scrawls, but they are elegantly minute in their tracery, frequently beautiful in form, and in their bold and often violent contrasts of color never inharmonious. Unfortunately, these reviews were the exceptions, as you could possibly imagine. One art critic stated Houghton's works were reminiscent of, quote, some of the maddest of William Blake's designs and of the later whirligigs of J.M.W. Turner. That critic obviously was not a fan of non-objective art. Remember that at this time, it's 1871 after all, there was no precedent in the Western world for non-objective art. So we have these reviews. One critic stated, a visitor to the exhibition is alternately occupied by sad and ludicrous images during the whole of his stay in this gallery of painful absurdities. Another critic said, we should not have called attention to this exhibition at all. Did we not believe that it will disgust all sober people with the follies which it is intended to advance and promote? We viewed her work with horror and alarm, for we had never been so impressed before with the strange hallucinations of which the human mind may be capable. If we were to sum up the characteristics of the exhibition in a single phrase, we should pronounce it symbolism gone mad. Well, believe it or not, she did make one sale during the exhibit, obviously not enough to recoup her expenses, not even close. Did Houghton give what was holy to dogs? Did she cast her pearls before swine? What do you think? Houghton anticipated such reactions and stated that her work, quote, could not be criticized according to any of the known and accepted canons of art, unquote. Of course, she was absolutely right, for there was no precedent for such non-objective work. Now, Houghton, despite referring to her works as spirit drawings, wanted them to be seen as art, and herself as an artist. She was ambitious in this regard and even submitted her work several times to the Royal Academy for display in future exhibitions. Her efforts were, of course, rebuffed. But in the 1871 census, she listed her occupation as artist. Georgiana Houghton believes she was chosen by the spirits to paint from their guidance because she believed that she was a skilled artist, and she believed that the spirits needed a skilled artist to render an accurate communication. She said, quote, the spirits can, of course, better guide the trained hand and make a more speedy progress if they are thus relieved from all the elementary part. For no person can spring at one bound to a pinnacle of art perfection, any more than an acorn can in one season become a widely spreading oak. The criticism she received for her 1871 exhibition did not deter her, for she continued painting and continued her efforts to exhibit her work. I'll pause and give you a moment to gaze at this work, a little bit darker palette than most of her other works. Now, here's where she made a fatefully poor decision, though she may have needed the money since her art career was not progressing as she hoped. She worked with the controversial photographer Frederick A. Hudson, who published collections of spirit photographs showing what appeared to be ghost-like apparitions of deceased individuals. Hudson was accused of doctoring these photographs to trick the public. Houghton posed for several of the images. You might say that Houghton could have used the guiding business acumen of a professional agent who would have steered her away from partnerships with folks like Hudson. It wasn't good for the brand, after all. But Houghton regardless of any controversy surrounding her or her art, would not be deterred in trying to get the public to take her art seriously. Unfortunately, she failed in that regard. Over half of her surviving works, 35 in total, did mysteriously end up in the collection of the Victorian Spiritualist Union in Melbourne, Australia. No one knows when or by whom they were shipped there. But today, less than 50 of her works are believed to be in existence. Less than 50, at least, have been discovered. What happened to all the rest? She showed 155 works at her 1871 exhibit. So over 100 are lost. Well, I guess if we are in luck, perhaps they are hidden in crawl spaces or stowed away in the attics of Victorian era homes in London somewhere. Her art may be obscure and controversial, but they do help draw a crowd. Due to a recent exhibit in 2016 at the Courtauld Gallery in London, her works, like Af Klimt's, are attracting a lot of attention and rewriting the history of art. What can we learn from Georgiana Houghton's spirit art? Well, we can learn what the art world came to learn in the 20th century, that creativity need not rely on rational processes. It can derive from heightened psychological and emotional states. Art critics have hesitated to call her works abstract because, unlike Vasily Kandinsky, who was consciously painting an inner experience, Houghton, and Hilma af Klint for that matter, claimed to be painting realistically an immaterial world external to themselves. Nonetheless, it was a spiritual world, incomprehensible to the known senses, non-representational of the physical world, purely symbolic, and thus, clearly to me, abstract. You can see her work now for yourself, as well as Hilma af Klint's, if you have the resources and time and inclination. The exhibit Women in Abstraction is currently on view at the Pompidou in Paris, and the exhibit ends August 23rd of this year. So that only gives us 11 days. But fortunately, the exhibit will travel to the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain, and be on display from October 22nd, 2021 through February 27th, 2022. Over 100 artists are featured. I'm just throwing that out there to you in case some of you are interested. As we close, take another moment to look at her art. The sensuous lines, the intricate detail of lattice and filigreed forms. I can't help but believe she experienced something profound while creating works such as this. But what are we to make of her as an artist? What should her stature be in art history? It's a legitimate question because she indeed renounced authorship of her works, giving credit to deceased relatives, saints, and Renaissance artists. And yet she also claimed she was chosen as their medium because she possessed a certain level of artistic skill, allowing her to more faithfully render their symbolic imagery. The closest analogy to this creative process that I could come up with are the theories of scripture as divinely inspired. In more traditional arguments, it is said that the Spirit spoke directly through the writer, but nonetheless used the writer's particular skills and way of expression. Well, that certainly describes Georgiana Houghton's experience of divine inspiration. So on this final slide, look closely at her work. And think perhaps of other artworks that you love and cherish. Let me finish by asking you some questions. Are some artists divinely inspired? Should an artist be inspired from another plane of existence, a plane unseen to the eye, which some call transcendent and heavenly, though others may simply call it an altered state of consciousness? And should we take the imagery expressed under such conditions seriously? What do you believe? Personally, I can't help but take it seriously. Not because of the artist's experience creating the art and their claims of being guided by spiritual entities, but because of my own experience viewing the art. It's rich in detail. It's brilliant in color. It's mesmerizing to my mind, my heart, and yes, to my spirit.